objection.
Mr. President, I want to speak on behalf of the amendments offered by Senator Kennedy and myself to the First Step Act. I think many of the policies in this bill are deeply unwise to allow early release from prison, thousands of serious, repeat, and potentially violent felons over the next few months if this bill passes. Our amendments won't do much to solve that problem. They won't solve some of the other problems of the bill, which slash some of the mandatory minimum sentences in the future on the front end of sentencing. However, they will fix some of the worst parts of this bill. And I would urge all my colleagues to support them, and frankly, I don't understand why any senator would oppose them. Let me just talk through what these amendments would do. The First Amendment would specifically exclude from early release for prison certain heinous criminals, to be certain that they are going to serve the full length of the sentence to which a jury and a judge sentence them. Let me just outline the crimes that our amendment would cover and therefore prohibit from early release. Coercing a child to engage in prostitution or any sexual activity. Carjacking, assaulting a law enforcement officer, bank robbery, assisting federal prisoners with jailbreak, hate crimes, and assault. The bill sponsors have said that this bill would not allow early release from prison for violent felons or serious felons. I consider coercing a minor into sex and prostitution or carjacking or bank robbery pretty serious crimes, and usually violent crimes as well. Our amendment would also ensure that there are no violent felons that are released from prison or any other sex offenders. This is consistent simply with the rhetoric and the talking points the bill sponsors have used for years to sell the bill. Unfortunately, the bill text does not cover all violent felons or sex offenders. Now, 62% of all federal prisoners would still be eligible for early release according to the United States Sentencing Commission. So this would not solve all the problems of the bill, but it would at least ensure that some of these most heinous criminals who prey on young children or the vulnerable are not released early from prison. Our Second Amendment is a victims' rights amendment. It simply says that this bill, which creates new ways and categories under which federal prisoners can serve their sentence, if they do in fact get released from prison early, their victims will be notified and given a chance to comment. They don't get a veto. I frankly probably wouldn't object to that, but they just get notice, and they have a right to write a letter to the warden. I think we should stand with victims at a time when we're passing legislation that is going to slash sentences on the front end for serious and repeat felons, and then release them early on the back end. It's not too much to ask that we notify their victims when they're released early from prison and give those victims a chance to comment. Finally, the third Kennedy-Cotton Amendment would direct the Department of Justice to track the recidivism crimes of any prisoner released early from federal prison under this law. The bill sponsors make much about the recidivism reduction training that federal inmates will receive, but how it's all evidence-based. This simply provides more evidence. Consistent with the Department of Justice's traditional collection of criminal justice data, it directs the department merely to report to Congress on the recidivism rates of inmates who are released under this legislation. Again, these are very modest amendments. They are consistent with the rhetoric of the bill sponsors. I know that some of the sponsors have said this is a poison pill. I frankly don't see why. It's consistent with their own rhetoric. 62% of all felons in federal prison would still be eligible for early release. It does nothing to reduce the leniency on the front end for 2-time and 3-time drug traffickers. These are pretty modest amendments. I wish we would have already voted on them. Senator Kennedy and I were ready to vote hours ago. I know there's some disagreement about other amendments on which we may be voting, so let me state for the record, I also support Senator Lankford's amendment to ensure that faith-based organizations have access to federal prisons and federal grants as one of those very critical anti-recidivism opportunities that we provide to federal inmates. This amendment was promised to Senator Lankford last week. Somehow it didn't get into the text of the bill. I think it could be adopted by unanimous consent. I certainly support Senator Lankford's amendment to be adopted by unanimous consent because I support faith-based organizations who work in prisons to try to help prisoners turn their lives around. Another amendment under consideration is Senator Cruz's amendment that would exclude more offenses from early release. I support Senator Cruz's amendment as well, and I would support a unanimous consent agreement to call Senator Cruz's amendment to the floor and to pass it. It doesn't overlap exactly with my amendment. It doesn't have the same offenses, but it does have serious offenses. So I think that we should call that up as well. And then we can vote on the bill. The bill has been years in the making. This result of painstaking negotiations. These amendments are pending. They're germane under the rules of the Senate. We should vote on them. We should vote on passage of the bill, and then we should move on to the Senate's other business. Mr. President, I yield the floor.